here in about 1 more minute. So grab a glass of water, get situated, and we'll begin here pretty soon. All right. Well, let's dive in here. So thank you for joining me. This webinar, as you could see, is entitled The Insights to Managing 2 to 10 Locations. And boy, is this kind of a big topic, a big game. I'm hoping that there's a lot of people watching this that haven't started expanding into multiple locations yet, that you are doing the research, you're trying to learn as much as you can out there, and that hopefully this will be a wonderful kind of chapter in your learning as you consider diving into this much, much bigger game. So without further ado, let's dive in here. And oh, by the way, I'm going to be going through these slides, and feel free to type in questions into the chat box. I might have time to answer those questions, but if I don't have time, if you don't get your question answered, we will be answering them after this. We can also provide a recording of this for those of y'all that for whatever reason had problems and couldn't watch the whole thing. And also, if you want to get a hold of me directly, my Instagram is right here on the screen, dr.scott.leune. That is my personal Instagram. So you're going to see me, you're going to see pictures of my kids. And when you message on that account, it goes just and directly to me. All right. So let's dive in here. Let's dive into insights to managing 2 to 10 locations. Now, I want to, for those of you that don't know me, I'm not going to dive into my story here, other than the fact that I've spent the last few decades building my own practices and selling them, helping other dentists build practices, helping other dentists sell, helping other dentists expand. I've been part myself individually of more than 200 locations. And over my career, we've had more than 20,000 dental practices use a company that I've built or that I've managed in some way. And so I'm coming to you from kind of the experiences of the trench. What's it like, adding locations, stretching yourself thin, having to somehow hire more people when it's hard to even find them, and bring on great dentists when you never know if they're going to be great to begin with. And at the end of the month, you've got enough money to pay your bills and meet your goals. And that whole game I have played, and I am covered in career scars from. So this is going to be kind of a real session where when I talk to you about these things, please know every single slide is got my blood stains all over it from kind of the pain that I've had to go through in learning some of these lessons. So let's dive in on a basic level for a second. What is important about multiple locations? It is consistency. At the end of the day, we need consistently good patient care. We need consistently good profitability. Our operations need to be consistent, meaning we need to answer the phone pretty much the same way. We need to present finances the right way, the same way. Consistently, we need to be achieving our weekly production minimums. We need to be, having consistent culture throughout the locations. If we have consistency, then we can grow very large on that without the typical pains of expansion. We can get funding with very low risk. We can make decisions in a very clear way when we can consistently achieve. That's a lot different than duct taping a bunch of practices together, some of which are running well and some of which are not running well at all. Some of them have great teams and some of them, the team just doesn't seem to be doing well. We might have a good dentist in one or a dentist not so good in the other. That is not consistency. And that kind of life, that duct tape together roller coaster ride of inconsistency can truly do some damage to us over time. So to do this game right, we need to understand that consistency is one of the most important things. Now, as we talk through this, we're going to talk about a lot of things, including valuation and profitability and financial performance and the legal structure that most of us are going to have as we go from 1 to 2 to 10 to more locations is something like this. It is a DSO type of structure, legally speaking, where we have our clinical entity or clinical entities that could have one or more locations in them. And then those clinical businesses pay the management company for things. And then the leftover money out of the management company, we call EBITDA, earnings before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization. That's basically how financially successful is our organization. So we are doing dentistry in the clinical entity with, of course, clinical providers, and we are paying the business entity for a bunch of support to those clinical entities, and the leftover money is EBITDA. It's the EBITDA that represents a very important part of understanding how much we're worth, how much loan money we would qualify for adding more locations. And that EBITDA, we take that EBITDA per year and we multiply it by a certain number that we call a multiple, and that will give us what our whole organization is worth. So for easy math, if we've got $1 million of EBITDA in, let's just call it 4 locations, then we are worth somewhere between $6.5 to $9 million as an organization. And of course, if we are a faster growing organization, we might be worth a little higher multiple than if we're a slower growing organization. If we have a lot of consistency, a lot of predictability in growing more and more locations, if we have the ability to get more and more locations, that also increases the multiple within that certain range. And we can also take advantage of this, just as a side note, because single practices typically sell for a smaller multiple, but our larger organization is worth a bigger multiple, then we could potentially buy a single practice at a 4 times multiple. And the day after we own it, it's in essence worth an 8 times multiple because it is glued into now our larger organization. And that is called multiple arbitrage. So as you can see in this very basic introduction right now, that there are significant kind of financial strategies that we need to take into account, not just for the day we sell, but also for the journey of getting additional funding to add more locations, maybe even sooner. So we need to make sure that we have consistency in our financial performance, in the right legal structure, so that we can get money loaned to us correctly, and that EBITDA, we are maximizing it, and we are hopefully climbing up the multiple ladder so that our organization gets worth a larger and larger multiple of EBITDA. All right, well, let's dive a little deeper. Let's talk about maybe this, what I mentioned, this kind of $1 million of EBITDA benchmark. Here are some numbers I'm going to start throwing out to you. And if you've got a paper and pen, you might start taking a few notes. But to achieve $1 million of EBITDA, whether that's in 1 location or 5 locations, typically a good EBITDA margin to achieve is an 18% margin. So what that means is that for every $100 of collections, after we pay all of our bills, including paying all of the doctors performing dentistry, after all bills are paid, we're left over out of that $100, we're left over with about $18. that we would call EBITDA. Now, EBITDA stands for earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization. So that means, our $18 is after we pay all of our bills, but that's before we pay our interest on the loan and our taxes and any sort of depreciation or amortization. All right. So 18% margin is what we're going for. So to do the math, if we want $1 million of EBITDA, we're probably collecting about $5.5 million per year. And in a kind of mediocre level of performance, that means we likely have 5 or 6 associate dentists and between 6 to 9 hygienists. That means every doctor is doing around $50,000 a month in production, and the hygienists are doing something very normal and average, like $800 a day or so in production. If we have 5 or 6 dentists and 6 to 9 hygienists, we'll likely have $5.5 million in collections. And if we achieve a decent margin of 18%, that means we have $1 million of EBITDA. And if we have $1 million of EBITDA, we apply a multiple to that from the previous slide, and that tells us roundabout what our organization is worth before we have to pay off the debt, before we pay taxes. Okay, so let's look at a single location first. Well, actually, let me back up here. I apologize. These are the typical kind of cost percentages that we are striving for. And so you can see our non-doctor personnel, you would call those staff costs, right? Those staff costs in an associate-driven, multi-location organization, we're trying to get around 28% of staff costs. Now, as a side note, if you were owner-driven, if you just had an owner dentist, they typically produce more on average than associate dentists. With the same employees, they produce more. And so if this were an owner dentist only, we would strive for something much lower than 28% staff costs. But in an associate-driven margin or associate-driven organization, 28% is what we're going for. You can see our supplies, that's office and dental supplies combined, 4%, lab 5%, general and admin, that's where you find a lot of other things like marketing costs and so forth. That's 12%. Management fees, that would be 4% about of what we're paying for kind of the layer of management that oversees multiple locations. So for example, if you have a regional manager or if you have a bookkeeper and that regional manager and that bookkeeper are supporting multiple locations, there's a cost to that. And that would typically be around 4% of the practice's collections. And so we're left with this 18% margin. It's going to fall somewhere around this. As an example, here is a single location. And this might look busy to you right now, but let me kind of highlight what we see here. We've got 1.1 million where it says gross profit, 1.17 million. That is your collections, net collections. So we've got collections of $1 million, 1.1 million, 1.18 million. And now we can see our staff costs are 28%. That's great. When we add our lab and supplies, we see lab is below 5. That's great. Supplies are below 4. Excellent. Our general and admin is a little bit high at 13.9. We wanted it 12 or less. And overall, we end up with a 19.9% margin. 18 is what we're striving for commonly. 19.9, we're good. So what this means is that I, the owner, whether I'm a dentist or not, I, the owner, own this location. And after paying all dentists for the dentistry they do, I'm paying them as associates. Even if it's the owner that's doing the dentistry, they're being paid as an associate. After all bills are paid, I am left with, in this example, $235,000 at the end of the year. And of course, out of that $235,000, I'll have to pay for my loan payments and my taxes. But $235,000 out of one location. This is kind of a common set of numbers we're trying to achieve. We'll look at 3 locations. And here we can see 5.88 million in collections and staff costs right at 28%. Excellent. My lab's below 5%. My supplies are below 4. I end up with an 18.1% margin. Very consistent performance. If you were to look at these 3 locations separately, these specific ones, you would see that they all have about the same percentages. They all collect about the same amount. And that is strategically done on purpose. So we are trying to achieve consistency first. We're not necessarily trying to push all of the locations to their limits. We are trying to get consistency first, build the muscle of being able to control where you end up. And from there, we try to grow. So in this example, again, I might own 3 locations. We collect 5.88 million. After paying all expenses, including dentists, I'm left with almost 1.1 million of EBITDA going to me. All right. So what about going from 1 to 4? What about this path? This is commonly the first big struggle, is 1 to 4 for a lot of dentists. They start out with 1, super successful. They're doing the dentistry. Maybe they've got an associate and they say to themselves, I want to be entrepreneurial. I want to open more locations. So I'm going to get location 2 and location 3. Well, location 2 many times doesn't grow like location 1. And the dentist went from being able to dedicate their entire time to 1 location to now only half of their time to each location. And location 3 many times, unfortunately, could lose money. And so now you end up with a situation where the dentist is stretched super thin, the owner trying to juggle this. The first practice is making money, but they're having to pay for the losses of the third practice. The second practice is kind of break even. And all of a sudden, 2 or 3 years go by and this owner dentist is like, man, I'm working triple as hard and I'm not making any money. That could be what happens. And that is not what we want. We want consistent success. So I'm going to kind of walk you through now, one strategy you could have to make sure that you are growing success as you add locations, that you truly are kind of growing up on this journey. And so what we do is we start with a single location. We need to get that location first to a high margin, 50% or less overhead, 30% or more EBITDA. 1 location. What we don't want to do is have location 1 be low profit and then go replicate that model. That's way too risky. We need to de-risk ourselves. We need to create a model that's high margin, a location that's kind of the cash cow that gives us stability. And so we might need to increase our fees. We might need to add specialty procedures. We might need to finally bring on a coach, get phones training, get case acceptance training, fill this practice with heavy marketing, and end up with this situation that says, wow, we've grown and we've gotten our overhead at 50% or less. That becomes kind of the first location. And from here, typically, it might just be the owner dentist still. So we have to transition location 1 into not needing the owner, ideally before we add location 2. So what we'll do is we'll take location 1 and then we will go into this initial expansion where we bring on an associate dentist now. We are going to market more. We're going to focus on patient retention. We're going to focus on the schedule. We're going to try to get the owner to get the specialty procedures, because the hope is the owner starts working less days, but produces the same or more, because the owner is now doing more surgeries or more ortho, while we learn how to operate with a second dentist. And once we've achieved this and we're running at about 26% EBITDA or so commonly, then we will do the final expansion of that first location, where we've maybe maximized the hours, we brought in additional dentists potentially, and we really have pulled away from needing that owner any more than just very part-time to do specialty procedures. The owner should now be twiddling their thumbs in a large practice with a healthy EBITDA margin. That means we've solved enough riddles in location 1 to be very profitable without the owner needing to micromanage it, so that we can add location 2 and have the owner hop over there, and location 1 is not crumbling. Location 1 stays steady and consistent and strong and profitable. Now, something to understand if you've never had an associate dentist is you got to understand that these associate dentists typically diagnose less than an owner on the same patient base. They typically have less case acceptance than the owner because they're typically earlier on in their career. They haven't developed and matured to the highest level yet with their case acceptance skills or with their diagnostic skills. And so therefore, if you give an associate one of your days, the owner gives the associate one of the owner's days, you are going to see a huge drop in production and collections typically occur on that day. It may go down to half or even less. So here's an example of how impactful that math is. You can see here, when we had an owner, we had $1 million of collections, which means we could use all that million to pay the bills. But with an associate, they collect half as much. And then on top of that, we've got to pay them for it. So they collect 500 grand and then we pay them, let's just say 150 in this example. So we're only left with $350,000 to pay the bills. When we had an owner, we had $1 million to pay the bills. But when we gave those days to an associate, now we've got only 1/3 the amount of money to pay the bills. So we have to know this. We have to strategically bring on associates without letting the owner's production dip, without giving away what the owner did to a less efficient and productive associate. So the way we try to do that and set ourselves up for success is we have the owner doing more and more specialty procedures so that as they give up days and share hours, they do more production per hour when they are still working. And so they could still have $1 million in collections working half the days. And now we've got an associate taking over the days and doing decent, right? So that is one very important thing. Here's how you mess that up. You tell yourself, well, I'm tired as an owner. I want to bring on an associate. We don't really have enough patience for that. So I'm just going to give them 2 of my days. And then I'm going to hire them for 4 days a week, but they're going to get 2 of my days. And then we're going to add 2 days. Well, that can be disastrous financially because of what you see on the slide. You will lose 2/3 of the contributory income to pay your bills. So we have to have a strategy around that. We can't just recklessly add an associate. It's bad for the associate too, because you're fighting for the same patient base in a way. It's not good for either one. Now, when we think about, okay, what is an owner going to do when we have multiple locations? Number one is when you only have between 1 to 4 locations, I typically would recommend that you're still a high income dentist. You are still practicing. However, you're only practicing part-time. And when you do, you're doing the full arch cases or the Invisalign cases or the impacted wisdom teeth. You're doing higher dollar procedures to allow yourself to make good money with your 2 hands and to not erode away your practice collections as you replace yourself with associates. In addition to being that pseudo specialist, as you see on this slide, being that high income dentist, you are going to likely be in every single location every single week because you are still having to do on-site management when you have between 1 to 4 locations. You're not large enough yet to have a big management team. You have to be the regional manager yourself, managing these office managers. You have to have face time in the locations. And so because you need to be there, let's just call it 4, you're working maybe 4 half days. So you're in every location a half day a week. And then you might stay in that location for the other half of the day. 1 half of the day, you are doing your full arch cases and producing very well. And then in the other half of the day, you're having the meetings you need to have, the weekly and monthly meetings. You're performing the audits. you're cultivating the providers. And so you are, as an owner with multiple locations, going to become a very part-time clinician and a part-time regional manager. When you're a clinician, you have a very heavy focus on high dollar dentistry. And when you are a regional manager, you have this checklist of tasks to perform. Many of those tasks are meetings and audits. And it's with those meetings and those audits that you will be able to have accountability. You'll be able to keep all of your processes in check. You will be aware of the friction inside of your organization early so that you can address it. What you can't do is be a general dentist in all these locations, or even some of them having to cover hygiene exams and putting out fires at the same time in some other location. No, you really do have to be strategic about this in the 1 to 4 location phase, where you are going to stop doing hygiene exams. You are going to stop being a traditional general dentist many times. When you're clinically working, it's high dollar. And when you are on site not clinically working, it's highly effective management time with audits and with meetings. So let's look at some examples, some take-home pay numbers when you are part dentist, part regional manager. In this example, we've got 4 locations. In those locations, without the owner doing any implants, they collect $7 million. And their EBITDA, without the owner doing any implants, the EBITDA is $1.2 million. Now let's add the owner. That owner is going to work a half a day in each location, maybe clinically, placing some implants. And over the course of an entire year, that owner could have produced $1 million in implants for that year. I mean, across 4 locations, 4 entire patient bases. Yes, it's very doable to do $1 million a year in implants. But here's the deal. The owner was using practices whose rent was already paid. The owner was using practices whose utilities were paid. The loan payments were already being paid. They already paid for an office manager. They already paid for an assistant. They already paid for the security and for the phones and the equipment. In other words, the owner's implant practice doesn't have the full overhead of a normal location. The non-owner collections paid all the bills. So for the owner to drop in and use some empty chairs and use a dental assistant on site, the overhead of the owner's practice is very, very low. So when that owner builds a $1 million implant practice using existing locations, they may only have 10% costs. So their take-home pay might be $900,000. And so if you add the 900 grand from their implant take-home pay with the 1.2 million EBITDA from the rest of the organization, you end up with 2.1 million take-home pay. Now, if I had to pay the owner as an associate dentist, they wouldn't get paid 900 grand for their implants, right? They'd get paid something a lot less than that. And my actual EBITDA, as my accounting team would calculate, would be 1.8 million. But from this setup, the owner's taking home 2.1. They're taking home 1.2 by owning 4 locations. And then they're taking home another 900,000 by the added implants that they perform. You see, that owner's half day at each location could be nearly half the money that they get to live off of. It is their way to de-risk. Apologize, my computer froze. It is their way to de-risk the kind of this journey of growing to multiple locations. You see, as they add another location, they add more patients needing implants, which means the owner will take home even more money because the owner's still relying in part on their 2 hands. But they're not spending their time doing fillings and sealants and crowns and things like that. They are becoming a pseudo specialist. So this is a very low risk approach or strategy. Can we go from 1 to 4 locations? And while we add risk of scaling across multiple locations, we're also going to add take-home pay because the owner gets to perform a lot more large procedures inside of facilities whose overhead was already paid. Okay. So now let's look at 10 locations. 10 locations. Here we can see that we've got 21 million in collections across these 10 locations. Staff costs 28%. My supplies less than 4%, excuse me, they're at 4%. My lab less than 5%. And even after paying 4% in management fees, which is almost $1 million, we end up with 3.8 million. 3.8 million in that net income, or in that EBITDA in this case. 3.8 million. When we have 10 locations, it's likely that that owner is no longer doing dentistry, because managing 10 is a lot different than managing 3 or 4. You can get by working a half day of management time per week in 3 or 4 locations. But when you've got 10 locations, you just can't be there all the time. And you've got a lot of pressure on you to focus more time on the providers, in retaining them, in influencing them, in supporting them. You've also got enough management fee budget to now bring on a regional manager who will be overseeing the office managers. That regional manager is going to replace what you were doing. Hopefully, you've professionalized your organization when you only had 3 or 4, that when you do hire a regional manager, you're handing your thoughtful checklist instead of meetings off to them. So they are going to continue doing what you were doing. And you now are going to go from being a regional manager of 3 or 4 locations to kind of the focus heavily on being the strategic leader of the organization, in adding more locations, in trying to restructure your debt, in deciding, are you going to have kind of a stock plan for associate dentists? You're going to recruit, you're going to support, you're going to meet with your providers. Your day is going to be filled with a lot of kind of leadership activities and meetings, and you will likely not be picking up the handpiece at all, even though you could, obviously you could, if you just structured the leadership duties a little bit differently, you could still carve out some time to be a dentist. But so often, when you're taking home $3.8 million every year, your focus is to just keep this thing healthy and consistent. And you would rather spend your time on that than on cutting teeth or doing surgery so often. Now, a big component of achieving consistent profit is around reducing your costs. And so as you add locations and you see more patients, can you keep your costs down? So here we look at an example of a single location practice of 2 million in collections. And all of these areas I've highlighted are typically areas that we have a lot of impact on to reduce costs. So how would we reduce the costs of front office wages? Outside of the normal things like not overpaying or not having a bunch of overtime or things like that, not being overstaffed with too many people, we could also transition our model to be more tech-enabled or more virtual services oriented. So we could be utilizing automated insurance verification, for example, with technology, and we could be utilizing virtual staff to help fill our schedule and process EOBs and answer all the calls we miss. And those virtual employees cost a half to a third as much as hiring someone on site. So those are the kinds of conversations you start having as you add multiple locations, because the cost savings becomes significant when you have 10 of these locations and you make a change like that. How do we control wages for the hygienist? Well, we could run an assisted hygiene model part of the time we're open. And we could put the hygienist on a kind of hybrid compensation structure where they make an hourly wage and they make a commission, so that as they produce a lot, they make a lot, but if they don't produce as much, they don't make as much. And that kind of dilutes our risk of this cost escalating without our production and collections going up to justify it. We could look at things like on the aligner fee side, we could be investing in 3D printing or finding alternative sources that are more affordable to provide aligners to our patients. On the dental and office supply side, we could have software that finds the lowest prices from all the vendors, and we could implement a weekly budgeting process where we never spend more than 4%. So all of these areas have opportunities to cut costs that are not very disruptive. As a CEO of one location, so often we're just not focused on that. If you're someone right now with just one or maybe just 2 locations, you probably would admit to yourself that if I or anyone else went in with a magnifying glass and looked at all your expenses, we might be able to find ways to spend less money than you spend right now. You just haven't been focused on it. But once you get to 3, 4, 5, 10 locations, you might be surprised at how valuable it is to you and your organization to be auditing your expenses every month and making decisions to be on models of dentistry that don't require as much cost. That becomes incredibly important as you grow. Now, I mentioned leadership, and to kind of give you a glimpse into some of the types of things that you might start thinking about when you have multiple locations, you can see on this slide, I've got some bullet points here. Is our office performing well? How are our providers performing well? Are we performing well financially? What about our staff? Are they performing well? These are some of the initial things, the foundational things we look at. For example, highlighted in yellow, this strategy of a mandatory weekly production minimum. If I can implement a strategy that says, no matter what, we're going to produce this minimum level of health, it's mandatory. We have to every week. If we have to stay late, we're going to stay late. If we have to get double booked on Wednesday this week just to hit this minimum, we will do it. We will convert same-day dentistry. If we don't have enough on the schedule to be healthy this week, we are going to activate new tasks in this location until we get enough dentistry on the schedule. And then we can relax and we're good. That kind of strategy is an example of something that would bring you consistency across multiple locations. Where when you only had one location, you were kind of focused on yourself and your hygienist and your treatment coordinator. Are they good enough? Are we getting enough patients? And you kind of become a victim of how much you just happened to do that week. You kind of on Friday look back and look, how much did we do? I don't know. I hope it was enough. I hope it was good. That's you being a victim of the result. When you have multiple locations and you get more mature as kind of a business operator, you will learn how to build the muscles that say we will always achieve at least this level. You will learn that you don't necessarily need to process EOBs today if you don't have enough on the schedule for the week. You could instead have the EOB processors start helping you fill the schedule until you got the minimum, right? You'll understand that communicating to your providers on a week that doesn't look good will bring more production that week. But we don't want to communicate to them every single week because then it takes away the effectiveness of the communication. Those are some of the things you start understanding how to do when you can't be in every single location all week long. Phone's performance, incredibly important. On the provider side, are the doctors diagnosing? Are they having a healthy percentage of their diagnosed dentistry accepted? These are things that you want to print and show them and have habitual meetings scheduled to go over so that you keep them connected to some of the most important numbers that result in your consistency. If you find that one of your doctors is diagnosing half as much on your patient base as everyone else, you need to figure out what's going on and address that. Or you might find out that you've got a couple doctors that have really low acceptance on the same location, same patient base as other doctors. That has to be addressed, and they have to understand that they are not scoring well, so that they also have this kind of self-awareness and innate kind of focus to achieve this consistency. On the financial side, supply, lab, staffing costs, and your income percentage are four. Of course, I showed you a lot of other costs, but these are four that you can dramatically impact from one month to the next with decision making. So, we need to manage all this stuff, and it gets difficult when we have lots of locations. And that is where a management team comes into place. So, with multiple locations, we need usually an office manager on site, and we need someone managing the office managers. That could be a regional manager, or that could be the owner acting as a regional manager. But these office managers, what they should not be are treatment coordinators and schedulers all day long that are processing patients, and you just call them an office manager. No, they need to be performing a list of specific tasks. They have the time and the training to perform these specific tasks that are related to leading that organization. Because I want you to think about them a little bit differently. Don't think of the office manager as your most skilled front office person. Think of them instead as though they are the accountability manager. They are holding your team accountable to caring for patients and caring for the business in the right way. They're holding the team accountable to doing the consistent processes and that we achieve a consistent result. They're performing audits and they're having meetings. They're not just answering phones all day or presenting finances. We need an accountability manager at every location. Shoot, many of you just need one at your location today, right? Maybe you have an office manager, but you never really turned him into an accountability manager. You're lacking this consistency and accountability. So you as an owner, if you only have a few locations, you're going to act like the regional manager, and you are going to manage these office managers. And here's what these office managers might do. They've got a daily focus. Are we staffed? Are we implementing the thing we said we were going to implement this month? Are we achieving our weekly minimum? We're looking at that every day. Then they're going to have a weekly focus. Let me look at the hygiene side, the schedule capacity, the phone's performance. They're going to have a monthly focus, and they're going to have a list of meetings. And this is what that office or accountability manager has to do so that I, the owner, get consistency from the organization and get enough things removed from my plate that I can truly lead us down a journey of growth. What about the regional manager? Well, that regional manager is going to have less tasks, but their tasks are insanely important. They're going to be checking in with the office managers frequently. They're going to be checking in with the owner frequently. And it's the regional manager that almost acts like the coach to the office manager. Almost like if you were to hire a consultant, that's what the regional manager is doing. They are helping diagnose what's happening in each location. They're helping set up and support the office manager so that we can bring accountability to that location to get the final result we need. And that regional manager is an incredibly important part of this whole leadership team. But again, many times the owner is sitting in the seat until they've got more than 4 locations, which means the owner needs to be doing these things properly. The owner has to do these things properly. Now, every month, the regional manager is doing a complete operations analysis. That means they're logging into your metrics tracking software per location and seeing what metrics have gotten better, what metrics have gotten worse. They're doing a complete financial analysis. They're logging into the profit and loss statements and looking at those ratios to make sure that we're getting healthy. They're overseeing the new things we have to implement, the monthly implementation project. And then they're having meetings with the regional managers and with the owner to discuss these 3 main things. How are we doing operationally? That's all the stuff we do day to day. That's how we create collections. How are we doing financially? That's how we're spending our money. Are we implementing the new things? And of course, there's going to be miscellaneous things like How's our staffing levels? How's the morale? Are there any equipment repairs? Are there any facility changes we need to make? But that regional manager is in essence kind of like the CEO of those 4 locations, or you, the owner, need to be doing that. Okay. So if we go through here and we look at this office team of office managers and regional managers, what I'm really saying we need to do on this journey is we need to professionalize the management of the practices. We need to professionalize the management of the practices, which means we achieve consistency. So if you're just at one location right now, let's turn that location into this professionalized management structure. We're going to have an office manager who has a checklist of office manager things to do so that they can bring accountability. And we're going to have an owner act like a regional manager to this office manager and have these set meetings with them. And as we pull the owner out of the day-to-day in location 1, we replace the owner with an associate. That owner is going to focus more and more on specialty procedures so that the collections don't dip. And ultimately, in that one location, where do we end up? We end up with professionalized management tasks with the office manager and the regional manager, the owner. We end up with multiple dentists where the owner now has extra time, nothing to do, but when they are at the practice, they're producing well. That becomes a foundation that we're now going to build on when we get location 2. So now we add location 2, and right off the bat, we've got someone tasked with the office manager role. We've got the owner now having those same meetings over there, performing specialty procedures over there, and still not enough to do. And as we have problems, fires, someone quits, there's, whatever threats here or there or everywhere that happen, the owner has the time to tackle those. Maybe I should have said this sooner, but when you look at kind of the leadership hierarchy, the team that is treating patients every day should have no extra time. They should be ideally full of patients. They shouldn't be overworked, but they should be full. When you go up a level to the office manager position, they should have extra time. Maybe 20%, 25% of their day has absolutely nothing to do, so that they're handling the unexpected things, the spikes of workflow that can happen, the chaotic moments that occur in dental office management. Then when you go above them to the regional manager, gosh, that regional manager may have 50% nothing to do, so that they're able to jump in as needed to perform unexpected tasks, like we lost an office manager in location 3, right? And then when you look at the owner should have very little to do so that they can start focusing on the large strategic vision, more locations, financial structuring, making sure our performance is consistent, helping oversee all the providers, lead them, keep them retained, find new providers. That's what the owner should be focused on as you grow bigger and bigger. Okay, so the take-home message here is, to get this consistency, we need to professionalize the organization, starting at location 1. If we want 10 locations with 20 million in collections and almost 4 million in financial success every year, the journey could be thoughtfully and strategically low risk. We could be very thoughtful about location 1, minimizing the risk and professionalizing the operations as we go to location 2, 3, and so forth. Once we get the foundation set, we're able to slowly pull the owner away from the clinical side. And then once we have enough locations, we tip to having a regional manager, we can slowly pull the owner away from the day-to-day management, so that at the end of this journey with 10, the owner's not doing clinical dentistry and the owner's not doing day-to-day management. The owner is making large, infrequent decisions and kind of leading the culture of the practice group. And that is ultimately like a very healthy way to go down this path, not breaking along the way. We want to be healthy the entire time and minimize kind of the friction or the pain points that occur as we add locations. All right. So that is, I see I've got a lot of questions here I'm going to answer. So I'm going to answer them. So stay on. I'm going to answer them. But those are my slides here to try to give you a lot of kind of things to think about. And I hope I'm speaking to someone on here. I hope I changed maybe how you prioritize things or how you come to the self-realization of what you might need. Or maybe I'm encouraging someone. You're saying, yes, I want to do this. I want to go down this path. I'd love to have 4 million in EBITDA and not do clinical dentistry. I don't know. But here's what's next, and then I'll answer your questions. If you found this type of thing helpful and you want to learn more about how to do this, more than just an hour-long webinar and seeing me on a screen like this, I have these very intense seminars. They're 16 hours long, like 400 pages of content. They are, in many people's opinion, the best in the business on how to run, how to start, how to run, how to grow, how to multiply practices, and also how to be an amazing dental CEO. I encourage you to look on our website, to look those up, and you're able to save money if you use this specific code just because you're on this webinar. And I hope that that helps someone on this webinar, and obviously it benefits us as well. And I would love, of course, for you to become one of our many success stories and kind of starting a new chapter in your career. You know, there's something to be said about that. You know, are you starting that next chapter you know you want to do, or are you stuck? Sometimes you're stuck because you just haven't gotten the training yet to feel comfortable moving forward with something. You're stuck because you can't quite see what to do. It just feels too complicated or feels like the wrong time. Feels like the wrong time, or it feels like it's too risky. You're just stuck sometimes. If that's you, this is probably the best way to get unstuck, is to go to some pretty intense, detailed training to understand how to do this better. Now, let me dive into questions. We've got quite a few questions. I don't know if I'll be able to answer them all, but I'm going to do my very best. So here we go. So first question. So the associate doctor cost is 23%. What if we're giving them 35% of collections or production? Okay. So let me go back to that slide here. You're talking about, gosh, I'll have to click through all the slides. I'm not going to do that. It'll take forever. You're talking about the profit and loss statement where I said, look, staff costs should be 28%. Doctor costs should be somewhere around 23%. Don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying pay doctors 23% of their collections. No, they might get 30 or 35% of their collections. What I'm saying is, once you collect all the doctor money and you collect all the hygiene money, and you compare what you paid the doctors only to everything, it's going to fall around 23%, unless you're some outlier. That's what we're trying to achieve. If you find that you're having to pay your doctors more than normal, you're an outlier having to really pay them a higher percent than what's normal, then you're going to need to make up for that with higher hygiene production. You see, you're going to have to make up for it with higher hygiene production so that you fall in a healthy percentage and you get consistent financial performance at the end of the day. Next question. For a DSO, what are your thoughts about running payroll at the DSO level versus at each individual practice level? You'll need to talk to your lawyer and your accountant about this. So I'm not necessarily telling you what to do right now, but I can tell you that I commonly see at the clinical entity, I commonly see clinical employees being paid. Sometimes all the employees that are on site at that location being paid out of the clinical entity. At the DSO level, I either see the people that float across the locations and the people that work remotely to support the locations being paid at the DSO level. Sometimes I even see the business team members from a location being paid from the DSO entity. But that's something you'll need to talk to your lawyer about first and foremost, because your state laws impact that, and how you've structured kind of your entities impact that. All right, next question. If we're in network and writing off discounts and non-payments from patients, where does that show up on a balance sheet or income statement? That's a good question. without getting too complicated, many times when you look at a profit and loss statement, you could see the money you billed minus the money that you had to refund, and then you end up with your net of what you ultimately billed or collected. Now, you can run your finances based on a cash base or modified cash, or you can go into like what GAAP makes you do. All of that you'll need to talk to your CPA about. But most of the time, you're not seeing write-offs or discounts falling on your profit and loss statement. You can see that in your software, but most of the time you're not seeing it on your profit and loss statement. Now, if you are running your accounting via GAAP and on accrual basis, you could potentially have that on your profit and loss statement. But when I talk about collections, for the record, I'm talking about the net collections, what you've actually collected, not your high UCR fee production. I'm talking about what you've actually collected. All right, next question. Let's see. Would you recommend the owner to refer to their first office for the major treatment instead of going to their multiple locations? No. So the question is like, okay, if I've got a parent location and then I've got a couple other locations, should I refer the patients to the parent location? Absolutely not. Usually not, because you have a loss. You have a decent portion of those patients that were referred never do it, never show up. If you kept them in the same location with the same team and the same facility, you will get more of those implants accepted, more of them done. So, of course, assuming it's feasible logistically for the owner to go to multiple locations, that is the best thing, because you maintain the highest conversion of those cases. Any change in this 1 to 3 location plan for a husband-wife general dentist team? That's a much bigger, more complicated conversation, but I would say that the take-home messages are the same. As an owner, as you add multiple locations, you want to start clinically taking less clinical time, you want to dedicate less of your time to clinical dentistry and more to management as you increase the complexities of your operation. And in order to buffer the loss of cutting back clinical days, you want to do bigger cases. Now, husband and wife, maybe one of you says, well, I'm just going to be the general dentist 5 days or 4 days a week, and I'm never going to go try to manage multiple locations. All right, then view that person as an associate, and it's the other spouse that is going to take this strategy. Or maybe both of y'all are going to say, we both are owners. We both want to kind of help manage. Well, then you're both going to take this strategy. It's just going to be a little bit delayed because you've got 2 owners instead of 1, but you're both going to start cutting back and focus on specialty procedures. You're both going to have management tasks. You're going to be a 2-headed regional manager. I would make sure one of you focuses on one set of tasks and you get veto power on that and you own that set, and the other one has a completely different set of tasks and you own that set. And ideally, to just keep most of the specialty in-house and in your pocket, one of you would focus on one specialty type and the other one might focus on another. One of you on ortho, the other on implants, maybe. All right, I'm just trying to go through all these questions here. So let's see. I'm getting a lot of questions, but unfortunately, I can't scroll down. So let's see. Okay, here we go. Oh, gosh. What does the metric doctor diagnosis percentage track? This tracks what percent of your examinations resulted in something being diagnosed. So if you were to go do exams on 100 patients, how many of those patients did you diagnose at least something on? That gives you a percent diagnosis. So you'd be surprised at how low that number is with a lot of associates. We know how to do needed dentistry, elective dentistry, and preventative dentistry, yet a whole lot of dentists don't diagnose very much. So from a percentage standpoint. So it's in your organization's best interest that you are able to diagnose on a lot of examinations. We're not going to diagnose something that's not there, but we can diagnose elective dentistry, we can diagnose preventive dentistry or needed dentistry, and hopefully we're on top of that and we're not getting lax about it, because that is bad for the patient, that's bad for the business. How do we compete with mid to large DSOs recruiting doctors? You have to understand how you're different and make that the benefit. So, yes, mid to large DSOs can provide doctors multiple locations to choose from. Sometimes they can pay for healthy CE budgets. And you may not be able to do that. So don't go try to compete with that. But what you can do is you can be a private practice and you can give that doctor autonomy. You can mentor them shoulder to shoulder. You could, you can look at your practice culture. Maybe your culture is amazing. Maybe your facility is beautiful. Maybe the fact that they don't have to answer to some office manager is significant to them. And all of those differences, you need to try to turn into a benefit for your organization. Of course, you could also pay them more, or pay them differently, or give them a minimum that the DSOs wouldn't give them, or give them phantom stock in your organization that the DSOs aren't giving them. So don't think that just because you're not a big DSO, you lose the fight in recruiting the dentist. There's a whole lot of dentists that don't look at a large DSO as the ideal place to work. You've got to make sure that the differences between them and you, that big DSO and your organization, are thoughtful, that you've been very thoughtful about kind of making those differences your strength. All right, next question. What monthly metrics are the managers checking? I kind of went through that. It was a long list I provided to you of types of things they're looking at. But in essence, they're looking at the operations. They're also looking at the financial metrics. So they're looking at things like missed call rates and conversion rates and diagnostic percentages. And they're also looking at financial stuff like staff costs and supply costs. All right, let's continue here. Let's see. Why have multiple entities? Would it make sense just to have one entity that owns all locations? You can. You can have one clinical entity that has multiple locations, or you could have separate entities. There's a lot of reasons why you might go one way or the other. For example, maybe you have partners in just a couple of locations, but not in all of them. Or maybe you want to offer a partnership to a doctor just in one location, but you only want them incentivized in one and not in all. That's an example. So these are the types of things that your lawyer and your accountant are going to walk you through so that you understand, what makes sense for you, where you want to go with this thing. All right. I know that we're out of time. Let me say a few last things here. Number one, I hope this was really helpful to you guys. I know that, some of these webinars you get on are just kind of BS sales pitches. I hope that's not how you feel about this one. I tried to give you just as much as I could in a short amount of time and it be convenient for you in the evening. Also know that if you have any other questions that you think of, or if I didn't answer the question that you submitted, please email. There's an email on the chat here, smortier@scottleune.com. You could also schedule a call, click on a link, but you can email us questions and we will continue answering your questions. This doesn't have to be over here right now. It's easy for us to answer questions. We got no problem just helping you every now and then if you've got a question. So please reach out to us. Obviously, if you're sitting here and you're excited about this path, excited about this journey, you probably need to come to some of my events. The main event everyone needs to go to is the practice management event. But if, we've got a multi-location event for those of you that are ready, that is also really, really good, really cool. But these events, you'll see if you've never been to one of my events, they will probably be one of the best events you've ever been to. It's 16 hours of constant stuff like this. So I hope that might be valuable to some of y'all. All right. So I am going to sign off and go kiss my babies goodnight. And again, I really do thank you for joining us. I hope this was valuable. If you got more questions, shoot us an email. But my last word of advice here for you is make a decision on what you want your next chapter to look like based on where you're at today. And without compromise, start that next chapter. If we could be helpful for that next chapter, great. But don't get stuck. If your next chapter looks like you're going to build some locations, do it. Move forward. Don't get stuck. That's my last piece of advice to you. All right. Best of luck, everyone. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.